Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. For this week's video, I want to give you a continuation of last week's 100th video on this channel, which was the talk I gave during a book launch event held at the Bookhouse here in Winston-Salem. I'm really excited to do the question and answer portion of that event. There was a great turnout, and the audience asked a lot of really great questions, in my opinion. So I hope that you enjoy the questions and my attempt to answer them. And if I've given you some value on this channel, as always, please like and share this video. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but if anybody does have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them about, sir?
What you own?
It's hard to remember, but I do have a chapter in the book where I talk about becoming a gun super owner. So someone did a study not too long ago where they found that 3% of the US population owns half of all the guns, right? So there's a lot of guns in the United States, and a lot of people own one gun, two guns. A lot of people own a lot of guns. And so I tell the story in that chapter of how, without even trying, I went from this momentous decision of getting my first gun to having 13 guns, fairly easily. This includes 5 guns just in .22 caliber, right? So a semi-automatic pistol, a revolver, bolt-action rifle, a semi-automatic rifle, and a single-shot .22 rifle, right? So I think one of the things that's hard for people who come from outside gun culture to appreciate is that there are lots of different things that people like to do with guns, right? And there are specific guns that you use to do those things, right? So, shotguns, semi-automatic shotgun, over-under shotgun, right? 9mm pistol in various different sizes. So, this is, that puts me at the gun super owner level at 13, which, the gun nut people that I know out there think is basically just a good start.
Do you have a gun on you now?
I do not.
So you don't have a concealed carry?
I do have a concealed carry permit. I think this Ronalda Village area here is a little bit ambiguous because it's owned by Wake Forest, and Wake Forest is a place where you cannot legally carry. And so I know that there are many people who say, I don't care what the law says. This is about defending my life, and I respect people who take that view. But I think that the odds of needing a firearm in this place and time is pretty low, and so I just observe the law in that case.
What about the grocery or your routine day is what I'm asking.
Oh, yeah.
You carry a gun?
No. I mean, not every day, because one of the things, again, about carrying concealed is the way that the law works is there are certain places you can carry your gun and certain places you can't carry your gun. I work at Wake Forest, so literally on a day that I worked, I would have to put my gun on, drive to somewhere outside of campus, take the gun out, secure it in a locked case, right? Drive on a campus, work, drive off, put it back on, and go home. So, the inability to just sort of travel freely everywhere carrying a gun does put some serious limits on. In North Carolina, if you have a concealed carry permit, you can be in a bar or a restaurant that serves alcohol, but you cannot have any alcohol in your system, right? You have to have 0.00. You can drive a car at 0.08 or 0.079, right? But you can't carry a gun at 0.00001. So, then if I want to go to Fair Witness Fancy Drinks, the best cocktail bar in Winston-Salem, right? Then I can't carry my gun, right? So, I think that's a reality that people who, again, that are like me, I'm risk averse, I don't want to run afoul of the law, so I play it on the very safe side.
And we know she's a better shot, so you just make her.
That's right. But she likes to drink though, so there's a fair point. Yeah. Reiterating the fact that Sandy's a better shot than me. Okay.
I don't know anymore. He's gotten really good.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that.
Fast learner.
You said you had an opportunity to make friends with a whole bunch of people you might not have otherwise known. Beyond meeting new people, what would you say is one of the most surprising revelations throughout this 12-year journey? Beyond the, oh my gosh, I'm gonna buy a gun.
Yeah.
Right? So in all of this research, anything that just really knocked your socks off?
I think one of the biggest paradigm shifts for me had to do with the issue of violence above and beyond guns themselves. And I think that one of the things that people are uncomfortable about or sort of object to firearms about is really the violence that underlies them. Because no one is really saying, oh, you shouldn't go to the range and shoot targets, right? It's really when it gets more into defensive firearms ownership that people get more uncomfortable. And the thing that I realized as I got more and more into guns as a liberal who, for whom Martin Luther King was a hero, and in fact, in the conclusion of the book, I have a little drawing that I made when I was in second grade that basically the assignment was to say, I have a dream that one day, and then we as second graders filled in the blank, and mine was that I could do what Martin Luther King did. So I was a huge believer in his cause, and of course the idea of nonviolence was such a big part of that, but I kind of came to realize that sort of nonviolent civil disobedience or civil resistance as a political strategy is not the same thing as being a pacifist, right? That you can believe in nonviolence and also be willing to use violence for defensive purposes. And I think that the realization I had was that violence is almost never the answer, but when it is the answer, it's really the only answer, right? And that paradigm shift in my mind, was really something that I could have never have guessed before, because as a highly educated, middle-class professional who lived in safe suburban neighborhoods my whole life, I never really had to think about violence, either being the object of it or being the perpetrator, the subject of it, until I was in that parking lot with my kids and I looked someone in the eye who I knew would be willing to do violence to me and potentially to my kids. So that was probably the biggest paradigm shift. And, it really helps me to think differently. It is like, I don't want to be violent. If I'm carrying a concealed weapon, I never want to use it. Everybody I know who's a responsible armed citizen never wants to use their firearm against another person unless it's absolutely necessary, right? Unless that's the only answer. And that's a very limited case. Now we all, one of the challenges, again, most people are normal. A subset of people cause a lot of trouble. We see cases on the news of kids driving into someone's driveway and someone shooting them from their porch, or a kid going to pick up his sister, goes to the wrong house and gets shot through the screen door, right? Those are criminal acts, right? And those people oftentimes get prosecuted for those criminal acts, right? And so I don't think we should judge the average armed citizen on the basis of what the worst case scenarios are. I think that's part of this paradox of guns, right? That, if your child is the one who got shot, that's devastating, right? And that's nothing that people should ignore. That has to be part of the conversation. But there's other parts of the conversation that I think get less attention than that.
Can you explain, something you tried to explain to me once before was sociology, which was your perspective, where you were coming from was looking at how things happen in normal ways. Why that made such a difference in the way you approach this as opposed to criminologists and people who deal with animals.
Yeah. Well, I got into the study of guns really, I spent the first 20 years of my life as a sociologist of religion, so I didn't know anything about the sociological study of guns when I started my project. And so, but the way I got into it was lots of normal people who did normal things with firearms. And so this was kind of my general orientation going in, but I didn't find really any scholarship on those kind of normal practices. And so what I did find was a lot of criminology, epidemiology, public health studies, and sociological studies that tended to focus on how gun owners are racist and misogynistic, homophobes, so my first argument was that there really was no sociology of guns, because there was no sociology that really took account of this broad swath of gun owners for whom guns are not problematic. And so that's sort of the way I've tried to chart my path in the field. It does sort of put me on the periphery of the field, again, because, and rightfully so, again, plane crashes, that's newsworthy, right? Society has problems, that's sociological. Plane lands safely, or people go to gun range and shoot and then go home, that's not really sort of newsworthy, or in a sense, not at the heart of what sociology does. I mean, sociology tends to study what's wrong with society, not things that are unproblematic.
So that's your subject, sociology?
Yeah, I'm a sociologist,
Would you
yeah.
be able to speak to this issue at Wake Forest, or would it be something you wouldn't approach?
No, I think that one of my colleagues is back here, and another one was here, so thanks for coming out. We have a pretty laissez-faire approach in our department, where as long as we're doing legitimate scholarship and publishing our work, that people try to stay out of each other's business. But in 2015, for the first time, I taught a course called The Sociology of Guns, and the first time the class meets is not on campus in a classroom, but we meet out at a gun range, and students are given the opportunity to shoot a .22 pistol, a 9mm pistol, and an AR style rifle. And this is a way of giving people a kind of experiential understanding of what guns are before we then move into the classroom to have our more academic discussions of the issue. And no one at Wake Forest, and hopefully are there any administrators here? No one at Wake Forest has ever said you can't take students to the gun range. And in fact, in the early years when I would go out to Pro Shots Range in Rural Hall, I'd give them some money for their time and for allowing us to use their facility. And there were years in which the university paid part of that as a field trip. So, maybe it just hasn't trickled up to the legal office or something. But, in all honesty, I never really thought twice about whether that's something we should do, because Wake Forest faculty have their students travel all the time, right? They drive to Charlotte to go to an event, or, they go to Greensboro, or wherever. Students are as in danger driving from here to Charlotte as they are going to a gun range and shooting under direct supervision of someone who's a trained, certified range safety officer. And so, if they ever said you can't do that, I would argue back on those grounds that, like, if I can't take the students to the range, then nobody should allow their students off campus, to any event, right? That life has risk. Right? We engage and we take on risk all the time in our lives because the benefits of taking on that risk are worthwhile.
It's like coming here.
Yeah, that's why I say, they're literally in as much danger driving to Moxville to go to the range as they are shooting on the range. Which, it's like, if any student of mine I sent on a field trip and they died driving to the field trip, that would be devastating. Now, that would be truly devastating. But the benefit of doing it outweighs the low probability that it could happen.
Were there any takeaways from your journey of learning about guns and becoming a gun owner and as a sociologist, that you could apply to the problem we have in our country right now of criminal gun violence?
Yeah. I oftentimes sort of try to punt the issue and say, oh, well, I don't study the negative outcomes with firearms, but, Sandy especially has insisted you can't avoid the issue. So I do have a whole chapter in the book on the risk of negative outcomes with firearms, right? And that includes accidental injury and death, homicide, or the biggest risk is suicide, right? And so, I think that some of the things that I've learned In general, again, this idea, the paradoxical nature of firearms, for most people, they're very safe, and for some people, they're quite dangerous. So homicide in particular is extraordinarily concentrated, right? In certain social networks and even on certain city blocks, right? Not even in a particular neighborhood, but literally on from this corner to this corner, a huge percentage of all gun crime will take place. So that, calls for, I think, very concentrated responses, right? Approaches to solving that problem that are overarching and blanket and cover all gun owners, for example, I think are not the most efficient way of getting to a solution to that problem. And suicide is also, demographically concentrated. We know the types of people who are more likely to hurt themselves. So if we target our approaches to the people who are at most risk of suicide, again, we can make tremendous inroads. And there's groups working within the gun community, like Walk the Talk America, if any of you are interested. They really, it's a guy literally sold his gun importing company to fund this nonprofit organization that's trying to create better conversations between mental health professionals and gun owners, because there's some mistrust there, right? And there's not always the kind of understanding that we would want to have in order to mitigate that problem. So again, I think understanding the specificity of the problems really helps. That, guns, most people who are gun owners will never use their guns to harm themselves or anybody else. That's just a statistical reality. There's 75 million gun owners at least, and 400 million guns in the United States, right? Now, on the other hand, what that means is you have 400 million guns, it's easy for people who have bad intentions to get a hold of them and do bad things, right? So again, that's something that I think gun owners need to exercise as much responsibility as possible to ensure that people who shouldn't have access to firearms don't have access to firearms. I saw Eric had his hand up back.
Does that mean that, does government have a right and responsibility to regulate guns and gun ownership and what kind of guns?
I mean, this is where I think I part ways with some of my more conservative friends within the gun community. As a liberal, one of the aspects of my liberalism, at least, is I have some faith in the government, not to destroy people's lives, but to help to sort of create a better society. So, I think the Supreme Court has said that there is a role for regulation of firearms, that we, for example, have certain people who are prohibited from owning firearms, like felons. And there are some people in the gun community who think, oh no, felons should also, be able to own firearms because this is a natural human right and you can't abridge a natural human right. But most people are comfortable with the idea that if you are a convicted felon, that you shouldn't be allowed to own firearms. Now, even within that, there's questions like Martha Stewart is a convicted felon, right? Should she be banned from owning firearms? I think it's something that sort of reasonable people can debate. There's a whole series of prohibitions on certain types of firearms that you can't own, short-barreled shotguns, Yeah. So, and again, there are many people within the gun community who would say, basically the National Firearms Act is garbage and we need to get rid of it and people should be able to own these firearms. And that there are many people also within the gun community who say, that's fine. I don't mind that as long as you don't regulate this other thing. So, again, we can have some broad agreement. When we start to talk about the details, we sometimes struggle more, but that's part of what a democratic society is about, right? Is to argue with one another, to propose different views, and to try to come to some consensus, even recognizing that we're not, at the end of the day, all going to agree. That's kind of a wishy-washy answer. But, I think, again, the reality to me is always somewhere in the middle, right? That, it's very easy to say from my cold, dead hands, or you value kids more than, you value your guns more than you value kids. And I don't subscribe to either of those views.
So, what recommendations, your opinion, would be if, say, a pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun owner how should the conversation change in society where you have the far right to be able to create a dialogue with the far left and better educate, with the far left spending and doing so much to push and vilify firearms?
Yeah. Well, this is my barber. He holds scissors very close to my head, so I have to, I have to answer this question very carefully. Yeah, and this is one of those areas where I feel like, especially if you look at the extremes on either side, right? There's a sense in which none of them are going to change their mind, right? So if you're, outside of the middle 80-yard lines of the field, we, probably not going to make many inroads. But if I were to talk to someone on either of those extremes, I would insist that they begin by trying to understand, why does that person on the far left vilify guns, right? Or why does the person who's on the far right think that there should be absolutely no restrictions on guns, right? And then see whether those people can hear each other, right? If they either can't hear each other or they refuse to hear each other, then there's no basis for conversation. But I tell people, I was at the National Rifle Association annual meeting a couple weeks ago, and I tell people, like, there are people who want maximal regulation of guns, right, for reasons. They hold these views for reasons. They're not just making stuff up. They're not just idiots, right? They're not just drinking the Kool-Aid, right? And if you talk to them, you find out, like, their child committed suicide, or their neighbor's child found a gun and shot their child, or they live in a violence-ravaged community. The only thing they know about firearms are that they are terrible and destructive, right? And that doesn't mean, like, you say, oh, okay, now I'll just change all my political views about guns, but that may create some empathy. At least you understand why that person takes that view. And on the other side, if you hate guns, talk to a gun owner, right? And talk to someone who, has some Second Amendment sticker on their car and say, like, where does your position come from? And I bet you will find that they have good reasons for those positions, right? And again, it may not change their minds, but at least you have that understanding. And if you're open your mind and you're willing to be empathetic towards that, it could at least change the way you talk about things, right? There's no reason to think that people who are on very extreme sides on an issue are ever going to agree, but it's about how do you disagree, right? And I think that's what is great. And I look around. Well, see, Sean's left. Sean and I probably agree on guns and probably not much else, right? He's much more conservative than I am, but we can talk civilly about the things that we disagree with, right? We talk half an hour every 3 or 4 weeks. Probably should be 3 weeks. I don't always get myself together, right? But if this looks good at all, I have Jody. Thank you. We don't agree on everything, but you have scissors to my head, so it's not really a fair situation. But even if you didn't, right, we would talk civilly about, I agree with that. We talk politics for literally for 30 straight minutes when I'm in for my appointments. So,
I don't think you have that much hair.
he cuts slow. He's meticulous.
It's not often that you can get a free education from a Wake Forest professor.
He's a clever one. So, and again, this seems like a crazy time to talk this way, right? When I literally opened up Twitter on whatever it was, Thursday night, and saw all hell breaking loose, and we're going to have Civil War II. But the other thing I'd say is talk to people face to face, right? Social media is terrible. I'm on social media all the time, and I try to have a very cultivated sort of social media contacts. But if your whole experience of a debate or an issue is through social media, it's garbage, right? So talk to people face to face. It's harder to see someone as an enemy, right? Or as human scum if you are talking to them face to face. It's not easy. It can be uncomfortable to talk to, that's the thing. Like, I would rather not tell you what my views of guns are. There's a lot of that sort of tension in these issues. So, maybe start by talking about something more mild, and then move into the gun issue.
Mark has
Oh God.
Yeah, I mean, I never like talked to you about this, so this is a genuine question. I would say at least, like compared to a topic like religion, gun culture, yeah, I mean gun culture is evolving in real time. How much did that extend the writing process, or is 12 years normal?
It actually. Oh, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I guess concisely, if gun culture is happening like in these last 10 years, like expand or like, I don't know, that made it difficult writing, or could you have?
Yeah, no. So your last question, it also took me 12 years to write my last book, which is on the topic of religion, which is what actually got me to want to write about anything other than religion. So I'm not sure after 12 years to get to here what that's going to mean. But yeah, I shot a gun for the first time 2011. I started my work on this in 2012. Okay, in 2012, you had things like the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting. You had Sandy Hook, right? You had the reaction to Sandy Hook, right? And so you also had some really significant Supreme Court decisions, 2008, Heller, thank you, 2010, the McDonald decision, and then just recently the Bruin decision. These really change significantly the way that gun laws are written and can be enforced. And we've also seen increasing political polarization over this time. So, it did make it difficult to try to keep up with what was happening in the world when you are, you wake up every day and you feel like you know a little bit less about how the world works rather than a little bit more. So that, I think that's a challenge in every area. It's definitely a challenge in the area of guns. And it was hard to get this book published. I had 33, thank you, Sandy, for remembering that, 33 publishers pass on the book. I had one of the best nonfiction agents working at one of the biggest literary agencies in New York shopping the project around for me. So there's a lot of bias against firearms, especially among liberal cultural gatekeepers, who are my people. I've been a liberal cultural gatekeeper my entire life as a university professor, but then to be on the outside looking in, that was a little bit hurtful. And there are parts of the book. I have a chapter on the AR-15, which I really just wanted to leave out of the book because it's such a fraught issue, and I thought no one really has ears to hear or to move toward each other or to try to understand each other on this issue. But I thought that would be kind of a cop-out. So there's a chapter on the AR-15 in there and how I grapple with that particular gun. So yeah, it was, it's hard. It's a fraught issue. It's exhausting to be involved in the field. I talk with Randy all the time about how, we're trying to thread needles, we're trying to get people to come together, we're trying to understand the nuance, the paradox, the both and it's, that's not the story that sells. If I wrote a book that was Guns Save Democracy, that would have gotten bought. If I wrote a book that was called Guns Kill Democracy, that book would have been bought. If you try to say guns are not saving or killing democracy, 33 people will pass on that.
Have you screenshotted the Amazon link showing that they're sold out at Amazon and emailed it to each of those 33 people?
Yeah.
I'll get right on that.
I've been doing a lot of work building up to this moment. This is the official launch day for the book, and I woke up this morning excited to see where the book was on the Amazon rank and everything. And I found when I logged into Amazon this morning that Amazon had sold out of the book. So that was it was a mixed blessing because I want people to be able to get the book. But it meant that people were interested, and my advice is just buy a book from your local bookstore.
Did anybody suggest you use the word liberal in the title?
I went back and forth on that. I thought it's going to alienate some people, to have liberal in there or professor, or is that just redundant? Should I just say liberal or professor? When I was at the NRA, there was definitely people who they looked and said, liberal, I don't care what you have to say about that. I was doing an interview with a fairly sort of conservative person in the gun field. And on my Zoom, I have my name, and then in parentheses, it says, he, him. And there was a person in the comments on the YouTube video that basically said, I saw the pronouns and knew I didn't have to listen to that person. So, those views are out there. Again, it's Jody's point. Like, if someone doesn't want to hear, they're not going to hear. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I like the idea that you explained that gun culture, guns are fun to shoot, you can enjoy it as a fine manufactured piece of equipment, whatnot. What puzzles me, or that I would like you to comment on, is why on earth you would carry a gun concealed or open. Doesn't this show fear, that you're afraid something's going to happen, that you're afraid that small percentage, you mentioned of so many guns and so many gun owners, it's really a small percentage of the bad apple that you're going to run into that's got a gun? And doesn't the fact of carrying that open or concealed possibly open you up to violence? If somebody sees you packing a pistol, they might just say, well, who's this guy think he is? You might put yourself in danger by the mere fact of carrying. So I wonder if you could go about this dichotomy. I like the gun culture. Fun to shoot them, take them home, put them away. But why do you want to carry one around with you?
Yeah. And I think that's a very fair question. And I think, one of the things that we often hear is that people who carry guns for self-defense are fearful. But I think that then, we have to talk about rational fear versus irrational fear, right? If you're irrationally fearful and you're carrying a gun, that could be a terrible situation because you might be likely to overreact to a situation that doesn't call for that. Like the kid in Kansas City who went to pick up his sister and knocked on the door and the guy shot him through the door, right? To me, that's irrational fear. It's also criminal. But, fear is actually a sense that we have that is useful to protect ourselves from harm, right? And so we might be attentive to things that are around us that are dangerous because we have this sense of fear. So again, I would say, like, if you're going to be a responsible gun carrier, right, be in control of your emotions, understand what fear is rational and what fear is irrational. Now, should you be afraid going to the grocery store to buy a gallon of milk? I think that's probably like the root of your question. And it's a question that I get all the time. I have a chapter in the book called Pascal's Wager and Firearms, right? So Pascal's wager, as you may recall, is that you're better off believing in God and being wrong than not believing in God and being wrong, right? And I think that for a thoughtful risk analyst who carries a firearm, this is some of the logic, right? That you're better off to have a firearm and not need it than to need a firearm and not have it, right? And again, the odds that given my lifestyle, given my risk aversion, given that I'm in bed by 9 o'clock every night, right? These sorts of things make my need to use a firearm on a daily basis extremely low, right? But if I should come upon that moment in which I really need it, and here again, to my point about violence, violence is almost never the answer, but when it is the answer, in that extremely unlikely, statistically improbable moment, it's really the only answer. And that's the law, that you can only use a firearm, lethal force in self-defense under extremely narrow conditions. So, I know that answer, doesn't fully satisfy people. And I thank you for that question. It's a question that I get a lot, but this is the way I think, as what I think of as a mature, responsible gun owner, that's the way I think about it. I dislike open carry, right? Open carry has never been against the law in the state of North Carolina, right? Concealed carry has been legal and illegal at different times, but the state has never banned open carry. But if I'm in Walmart and I see someone open carrying a firearm, I generally move to a different part of the store because I don't know that person, right? And in part, that's kind of irrational on my part because he could be shopping with his wife who's concealed carrying, but I feel safe around her just because I don't know she has a firearm. So, I think behavioral economics and, Daniel Kahneman has proven that we're not 100% rational, but I think that a lot of the people that I interact with, at least, are really trying to make the best risk calculation possible. Yeah. Okay. I think I will cut it off after this because I do want to sign some books and I don't want to keep you all hostage all night. Arlene.
When you first got interested in guns, was it because you had an experience that you felt helpless when you had your child and you felt like you were in a dangerous situation?
Yeah, I think that like planted a seed, right? But it was also like this general sort of realization of the commonality of guns. And so after then I had that first experience shooting, right? And I was like, oh, that was kind of fun. Then I didn't go out to Gander Mountain and like, give me the best concealed carry pistol you have. I was like, hey, let's get some over-under shotguns and go shoot clay targets. That's pretty fun. But then as I continued to think about that issue of vulnerability, then I really thought like, this could be a reasonable response to this situation, right? And that just percolated and it percolated. And I have to, I say in the book, like if I was living at a different place, if I was in Half Moon Bay where I grew up or at a different time in history, I wouldn't necessarily have become a defensive gun owner, right? Because it's just become more readily available in this day and age. So that's sort of the more sociological part is my personal trajectory intersected with social history at just the right moment. Well, thank you all. Those great questions. I think I will be sitting over here.